welcome on back to another episode of Auburn Anonymous. I am your host, joined by my co-host. My name is Miles Espy. You can follow me on Twitter or X, whatever you call it nowadays. Changed up the name to Ashton Daniels AA. Michael, where can people find you on Twitter?
I'm under the new alias of Jackson Arnold AA, and we're currently taking applications for more people to join the AA social media name.
Yeah, we've had some people reach out to us wanting to join the Army, and by all means, go ahead and change your Twitter, handle and stuff. We love it. We're here for it. Go ahead and join the Army. Typically, on our podcast, what you've seen us do is dive into football first and basketball second. And in football, there's certainly things to talk about right now with the transfer portal. We've made some great additions. Things are looking really up. We've had some people leave, people scared of competitions like Walker White, and so on and so forth. But with SEC basketball right around the corner about to start, we really wanted to give you an SEC, a deep dive into all the teams and, really look at all the teams and see who's going to be competitive this year, who has a chance at beating Auburn. And so that was something we wanted to do. So, Michael, you ready to go ahead and dive in head first?
Yeah.
Okay.
Who do you got first for us?
Well, first, we got Alabama. So everyone knows we're not doing it in any particular order. We're just going alphabetical. Look at Alabama, head coach Nate Oates. To me, he runs a very gimmicky offense. I've said that from the very beginning. It works some years, but very gimmicky, where he plays really fast. His team is fifth in the country in adjusted tempo. Offense is really strong. Defense can be hit-miss. The thing that I've said on this podcast before, and I'll say again, getting Cliff Anumer, whatever his last name is, Cliff, the big guy who came from Rutgers, was a mistake because that guy can't shoot at all. And that's Nate Oates' offense kind of thrives on that 5-out where they have maybe like a Grant Nelson playing the 5 who's kind of a three-point threat. And that's kind of when Alabama is at their best. So that's kind of held them back this year. Michael, what are your thoughts on them so far this season?
Yeah, I mean, they play a very NBA-like offense, as you just said. And as you look at the NBA today, there's not many people at the center position who are college centers who are making it and transitioning to the NBA that well just because of what you said. They like to run 5-out or whatever. Walker Kessler is one of those guys in the NBA who is currently just a big center who can't shoot or anything, but where it works for him just because he's so good at defense. And there's just Cliff Amari's definitely been a disappointment for this team. Losing Latrell Wrightsell was a huge miss. He actually impressed me to start the year. I didn't think too much of him. I was saying how much better Denver Jones and Chad Baker are than him, but he was actually off to a hot start to start the year and was looking like he was going to be their best wing, and that was a pretty big loss. Obviously, they have Chris Youngblood. He's only played, I think, 2 or 3 games back from his injury, and he hasn't been too impressive, but of course, I mean, he's coming off an injury. He's not going to be that great right away. Chris Youngblood wasn't a huge recruit. He came out of Kennesaw State. He went to Kennesaw State out of high school and transferred to South Florida, where he was player of the year in that conference. But he kind of had a bad end to the year last year and ended up not making the NCAA tournament in South Florida. Aiden Holloway, honestly, I mean, he hasn't been absolutely terrible. He's been decent, like
a little better than last year.
Yeah, he's not as his shooting percentages are up. He's no Todd Pettiford.
Well, Michael, to be fair, what do you expect? Is shooting percentage to go down from 30% for 3? Where is it going to go?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, Aiden Holloway is a solid backup role player. I mean, that's all you're really going to get out of him. Maybe he can get better throughout his career. I wouldn't be surprised if that guy hits the portal again, but maybe Alabama plans on bringing him back as their star player or go-to player next year. Then Alabama had is either number 1 or number 2 ranked recruiting class. I think these freshmen, other than LeBron Philon, besides him, the rest of the freshmen haven't been particularly great. And like all of them were 5 stars. The Philon kid, he actually he was committed to Auburn. As crazy it is, he was committed to Auburn, and ended up seeing all the guys that we had in our team were most likely coming back. Then committed to Kansas. kind of the same thing, saw all those guys and didn't see much playing time, and so he went to Alabama. And I think Kansas probably regrets taking Rylan Griffin from Alabama and over putting the money to Phylon, keeping him over there. Phylon's been pretty good, been a great passer. He's the only guy on this team I really see ever playing in the NBA. But at the end of the day, their best two players are Mark Sears and Grant Nelson. And, I've seen some Bama fans say that and they're best in March. Because, Mark Sears has been pretty bad this year, shooting percentage-wise. And Grant Nelson, he's been Grant
He
Nelson.
played well last March. You got to give him credit. Or as Janai Broom calls him, and I like to call him Little Shrimp.
Yeah, Grant Nelson. Yeah, I think, they play great in March. And if you're banking on them just to randomly start playing better in March, maybe you're right, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I think Alabama will finish around 5th to 6th in the SEC. Before the year, I had them at either number 2 or 3. Almost everyone had them as a preseason favorite to win the SEC. I still think they're going to be a good team. 5 or 6 in the SEC is still a top 15 team.
You're a 6 seed in the NCAA tournament, 5-6 seed.
At least. And I've watched most of these SEC teams play, and Alabama hasn't been super impressive, but maybe they'll get better.
Yeah, and I think they're a good team. Looking at it, they play Auburn in Auburn Arena, or excuse me, I just naturally said that, Neville Arena, and they play them at the airplane hangar that is Coleman Coliseum. And I tend to think Auburn and Auburn Arena is going to win super easily. On the other end, in Coleman Arena, or Coleman Coliseum, that game's losable. Now, what it would take for Alabama to beat Auburn would be them to get super hot from 3, because we are going to absolutely dominate Alabama on the inside. They have no answer to Janai Broom, to Dylan Cardwell. We saw it last year. Grant Nelson, who's a good defender. He's a good defender. He could not hang with Janai Broom. And Alabama's not going to win that matchup even in their arena. But Alabama's going to get super hot from 3. They can beat Auburn. I don't think they will. I think Auburn sweeps them pretty easily. I think we're going to beat them by 20 to 30 points in Auburn Arena. In their arena in Coleman, I think Auburn. Give me Auburn by 8. Give me Auburn by 8 in Coleman. What do you think, Michael? Are we gonna sweep them, or do you think that they'll get the game in Coleman Coliseum?
Yeah, I think Auburn and Alabama could play 3 or 4 times this year. Just depending on how the SEC tournament goes, and with the SEC being so good this year, they could even run into each other in the NCAA tournament.
For sure.
I think Auburn ends up sweeping Alabama as well. I just think it's a terrible matchup for them. Cliff Amari hasn't been the defensive monster that they expected him to be, and so now you're gonna have to have some five outs with Grant Nelson out there, and that other freshman I believe is Therion Reed. I don't see, unless just the refs just hand them the game, which we've seen before,
which is possible. Yeah.
I think 2 years ago we were up 17 with 9 minutes left and then just foul. So you never know. But as from years past, Auburn wins almost all their home games. Last year he lost one home SEC game, and I can go and tell you now we're not losing an SEC game at home this year.
Unless we just have a ton of injuries for one game. Not happening.
Yeah, regarding no injuries. As long as we stay healthy, we will not lose an SEC home game. I think we'll slip up 2 to 4 SEC road games. You can just see from years past. And it's never the teams you expect to. Auburn can go slip up at Georgia. I don't expect that to happen. Auburn can go slip up somewhere random. Just happens. Refs seem to call for the home team. College basketball, more than any sport, the home team, I feel like has an advantage. And that's even compared to NBA, NFL. College basketball is the hardest to win on the road.
For sure. And something, as we keep going down these lists of teams, what you're going to see is even the bottom feeders of the SEC, the teams who we don't think are going to make the NCAA tournament, they're still good. They're still. We have 16 very good teams in this conference, so it's very insane. And with that being said, let's jump into the Arkansas Razorbacks. So, new look this year. John Calipari is the head coach. Looking at what they've done so far this year, they're 88th in the country in adjusted tempo, and again, it's out of 364 teams, so they play pretty fast, and that's true to what Calipari did at Kentucky. They're 60th in the country, again out of 364 teams, in offensive efficiency. They're 28th in defensive efficiency, and really the only blemish you're looking at their whole resume is Their non-conference strength of schedule is 223rd in the country, so nothing too crazy. Record of 10-2, solid wins at Miami, which they have a losing record. They've lost to Mount St. Mary's. They lost to Charleston Southern. I don't know how great of a win that is. They beat Michigan, which Trey Donaldson, former Auburn Tiger, looking good for them. Then they've lost to Baylor and Illinois, so really haven't proven a whole lot. Michael, what do you take on Arkansas so far this year?
Arkansas is one of those teams I think can end up being very good towards the end of they're a team I think that'll pick it up in March. If you look at their roster, it's they replaced every other than one player being Trevon Brazile. They replaced every single player via the transfer portal. I think they brought a couple high school guys in, but they only have really 8 or 9 quality guys who are really capable of playing. But I really do think it's a good team. Jonas Adu was one of the best centers in the league last year. He hasn't gotten off to a great start. Mm-hmm. If you were basing this team based off their high school rankings, they'd probably be the best team in the SEC with DJ Wagner, Boogie Flan, Adam Thero. But I think they'll pick it up. I think they're still putting their pieces together. It's going to take them some time. They really haven't beaten anyone too good this year, and they've lost to the two teams who it's just they've lost to the teams that you would expect them to lose to, and they've beaten the teams that they're expected to beat.
Yeah. It's kind of like whenever they stepped up in competition, they've fallen. I guess with the exception of Michigan.
I don't think they'll win the SEC, but I think they're a team you definitely don't want to play in March.
I 100% agree. And one thing just interesting when I was kind of looking at this team up is Big Z. You remember him from Kentucky last year. Got in and got some minutes last year. 7'2", very large guy. I had no clue this dude's shooting over 50% from three-point land. Dude is shooting really well from three. I didn't realize he could shoot the ball. So if he could stick him out there, that could break some backs right there. That's a tough matchup right there.
Yeah, I don't remember if you were at the Auburn Kentucky game last year, but I sat right behind the bench, and Big Z, after it was apparent that Kentucky was going to win the game, he gave the bird to some old lady, because we sat right behind the away bench. He gave the
I was
the
not
bird
there.
to
That's
some,
funny.
Yeah, he gave the bird to some old lady, and he yelled at someone before the game was over. He was talking to the fans and stuff. And I remember someone, I forget who it was, someone on the Kentucky team trying to get him to stop. So
really, so he's a bit of a hothead, maybe.
Yeah. He's a bit of a troublemaker, but he barely played for Auburn last year, so I didn't get to see much of him in person. I just think he's a very raw talent. He can shoot, but he's a guy.
He's taking a big step forward this year.
Yeah, he's a guy you can push around though, down low. He's gonna have to keep developing. And maybe an NBA team would take him just because he needs development. He's nowhere. He's no threat in my eyes.
Okay. Well, yeah. Very good stuff. So next up, alphabetically, is Auburn. We're not going to dig too much into it. Oh, first off, we'll go back to Arkansas. Auburn plays them in Auburn Arena. Is there any chance Arkansas wins, Michael? I don't think there's much of a chance they win in our arena.
Yeah.
In Neville Arena. Excuse me.
That's one of the scarier games. Last year John Calipari was the only guy who did come into Auburn with DJ Wagner, with Adam Thero, with Big Z, with some of the guys on the roster now. So they'll have some confidence, but no. With the way Auburn's looked, and we're about to get into it, I unless an injury happens, there's a 0% chance Arkansas is capable of beating Auburn in Neville Arena.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel. Not much of a chance for Arkansas, although they'll be an NCAA tournament team in my opinion. So next up, Auburn. Y'all all know, coached by Bruce Pearl, record of 11-1. Very strong non-conference schedule, 10th in the country. Offensive efficiency, everyone knows Auburn's just been a wagon this year. No one can stop us. First, number 1 in the country in offensive efficiency. Defense hasn't been much worse. We're 11th in the country in defensive efficiency. The one thing that I found very interesting while doing my deep dive on Auburn is adjusted tempo. I think of Bruce Pearl as a very fast-paced, not quite the Nate Oates level of insanely fast, but playing it up tempo. And we're 179th in the country in adjusted tempo, which is right there in the middle. But I guess it really makes sense when you think about our stars being people like Dylan Cardwell and Janai Broom, big guys, in the middle, because, and I'm stuttering right now, so I'll cut this out, but, it makes sense because our strength isn't the guard, where it was Bryce Brown and Jared Harper. When our strength were really quick guards, we were running up and down all day. Now that our strength, not that our guards are bad, our guards are great. But now that our number one strength is, the big man on the inside, he's kind of slowing it up a little bit to where we're playing a very average pace. Michael, what you got on Auburn? I'm sure you got something.
Yeah, I mean, not much to add. We've talked about Auburn enough. They've clearly been the best team in college basketball this year, currently ranked number one the highest rated offense in the history of Ken Palm. I don't know how long that's been going for. Janai Broome is the favorite in Las Vegas right now to win the Wooden Award for Player of the Year. You got Chad Baker-Mazara and Denver Jones, who are, Bruce Pearl said earlier this week, both might be eligible to come back next year, which would be insane. Really just debatably the best position in the SEC almost everywhere. It's Dylan Cardwell's improved. He seems like he's getting better almost every game. I never imagined you'd be able to put him and Broome on the floor together. But until someone gives me a reason not to believe it, and Duke definitely did not, I think Auburn right now is just a clear favorite, not only to win the SEC, but to win the national championship.
Nah, I couldn't agree with you anymore. I mean, I'd be, unless if there's no injuries this season, I'd be kind of shocked if we didn't win it at this point. We've just looked that much better than everyone. But as you said, we've talked about Auburn, basketball plenty on this show, so we can go ahead and just move on. We know the great wins. We know the one loss to Duke.
Yeah. Well,
let's move on.
Last thing about Auburn is I was wondering, do you want to share a hotel in San Antonio? Or I was looking at go ahead and booking our tickets for San Antonio. Do you want to do that together? Or?
Yeah, we can do that. We can go ahead and lock them in because and heck, we can go ahead and get our Atlanta hotel booked because the number one overall seed is going to be playing the Sweet 16 and Elite 8 there.
Okay.
So we can go and lock it in. We can bunk up, share some money, save some money.
Sure.
There you go.
Yeah, for sure. Let's go ahead and get that done.
So next up, we have, and I'm gonna go and put this out there. I haven't said this to you yet. I believe I'm to the number 2 team in the SEC right now. I think the second best team in the SEC is pretty clearly to me the Florida Gators. Head coach Todd Golden, as we all know, a Bruce Pearl disciple, kind of had has some scandal going on there right now, which looked a whole lot scarier, I think, right before the season started. We can get into that in a second, but looking at play on the court, looking kind of like Auburn light out there. Offensive efficiency 6th in the country, defensive efficiency 18th in the country. Strength of schedule not as strong at 138th, adjusted tempo 84th, record 12-0. Wins against North Carolina, Virginia, Arizona State, at Florida State. Florida's looked really good this year, Michael. Do you think they're second best in the country right now, or do you think are second best in the SEC, or do you have someone else?
Yeah, I'll go Florida as the second best team in the SEC as well. I really like the roster they put together. And it's Todd Golden's the coach, who was previously under Bruce Pearl. So very similar. Hard place to go in and win at as well. Playing at Florida is not an easy place to go win at. I don't see them losing many home games as well in the SEC conference. They'll finish second or third. They're right there with Tennessee for sure. They got, obviously, here, let me look at it. They have the FAU transfer.
Elijah Martin.
Yeah, Elijah Martin. He's honestly been kind of surprising. I was not really expecting him to be too much transferring into the SEC. Unlike Janelle, we didn't even talk about him. Janelle Davis, who was FAU's best player on Arkansas. He's been a true disappointment in the SEC. But, yeah, Elijah Martin's been pretty good. Walter Clayton was an all-SEC player last year, so we knew what we were going to get out of him. He can obviously shoot the 3-ball, probably better than anyone in the SEC other than Miles Kelly. You got Will Richard, he's been in some NBA mock drafts before, and he's a pretty solid player. Alex Condon, he's the type of guy I look at, and I'm like, I hope Auburn can find a way to get him in the portal next year. Todd Golden, that's the good thing. If Todd Golden, you haven't heard much about the scandal recently, so maybe he's all good. But if something were to happen to him and he got fired, he's best friends with Stephen Pearl, and I could see him telling his players, hey, go to Auburn, very similar offense. And Alex Condon is one of those guys. He's a I want to say he's like 6'10", and big man who can shoot. But yeah, they have a very solid core of 4 players. They obviously haven't played the same type of schedule as Auburn. They haven't really beaten anyone too good. I don't believe they have any ranked wins right now. But, they've beaten who's in front of them. They've tried to play tough teams. I mean, it's not like they scheduled an easy non-conference schedule. You would think UNC would be good. You would think Virginia would be good. You would even think Florida State and maybe even Arizona State would be good. But none of those teams are. If Auburn had their schedule, if Alabama even had that schedule, they'd probably be undefeated in the SEC so far. So not like super impressed by anyone they've beaten, but it's an experienced roster, and expect
all the
them
pieces
to.
Are there.
Yeah. I expect them to finish pretty high in the standings by the end of the season. I don't expect them to be a team that's going to win the national championship, but I can see them making an Elite Eight run.
I'm right there with you, and I'll kind of get into that. I don't know all the details on that Todd Golden, the scandal, the crime. But I was listening to someone who I know you're familiar with, and I'm sure some of our listeners are, Jeff Nadeau on Twitter. We've been following him for a while. He's very big on college basketball, and he's very big on crime. And something he was saying, and I think it was kind of a stalking case with him and I believe a Florida student. I could be wrong. And something I heard Jeff say in a college basketball podcast, he very much takes Todd Golden's side, and he says, look, it's a simple case. If you're accusing the guy of stalking you, check the cameras. It's really an easy case to look at. And the fact that we've been this long and there's been nothing out there doesn't mean that it didn't happen. There's a chance it did, and for some reason it's being kept from us. But if he actually did it most likely would be known by now, because it's a very easy thing to check. Go check the cameras. So I tend to think the guy's innocent, but again, let the legal process play out. Anything else on Florida before we move on? I see... One thing I guess I'll throw out there, Auburn gets them in Neville Arena this year. I got it right this time. I think that this might be our toughest SEC game in Neville. I still think Auburn wins it. There's no chance I'm picking Auburn to lose at home this year. I'm assuming you're in the same boat, Michael?
Yeah, when it comes to Auburn, I guess, they're not going to win at Auburn, and there's no way I would ever pick against Auburn at home. I think we play Tennessee at home as well. Either Florida or Tennessee will probably be our toughest matchups. But again, as long as no one gets hurt for Auburn, you can just go ahead and count every home game as a win for me.
Okay. Well, now moving on to another team, which is the Georgia Bulldogs. We get them at home and away this year. And I'm going to be honest, before I kind of get into their numbers, I was planning on getting on and really complimenting Georgia this year. And then something happened, and I just can't do it anymore. But before I get into that, you had the head coach, Mike White, who, of course, was at Florida not too long ago, kind of got booed out of town. They weren't in love with him there because he took what Florida was kind of traditionally one of the better teams in the SEC, and they were kind of middle of the pack under him. Then Georgia hired him away, and he's kind of done that at Georgia. He took Georgia, except the other way around. He took Georgia from being one of the worst teams in the SEC to, maybe they're around the middle of the pack now, and that's probably about where I see him this year, maybe middle of the pack to a little below it. 240th in the country in adjusted tempo, so they play a little slower. 53rd in offensive efficiency, 31st in defensive efficiency. Non-conference strength of schedule is 314, so still a lot to prove in terms of who they play, but they have some decent wins against St. John's, Notre Dame, Grand Canyon. The one ranked team they played, Marquette, they lost, but I think they kept it close. Here's the reason I can't be too complimentary of Georgia. All the stats and stuff I've read off, that's based off of Saturday, December 28th. Today's the 29th. Georgia at halftime playing one of the worst teams in college basketball, South Carolina State, out of the MEAC conference, one of the worst conferences in college basketball, losing 41-24 to South Carolina State.
Wow.
Now, second half, Georgia has made it close. It's 55-52 South Carolina State, up by 3 with 8 minutes left. But still, that's a bad taste in my mouth I can't get out. Michael, what you got on Georgia?
Yeah, Georgia's basketball program kind of reminds me of Auburn's football program. I've seen a slight improvement they haven't improved as fast as their fans have wanted them to. At the end of the day, you look at it and it's just at the end of the day, it's Georgia basketball. I mean, there's no way I see Auburn going in there and losing a basketball game. I know we did a couple years ago, but it's similar roster to last year that came in there and just absolutely destroyed them. But I will say Asa Newell, who's a freshman for them, I think he's a guaranteed top 10 NBA draft pick. Very talented player. Again, though, having top 10 draft picks in college basketball has never been a formula for winning the national championship. It's about being old. They have a really good freshman center as well, and they have Tyron Lawrence, who Auburn wanted out the portal 2 years ago. And unfortunately for us, we didn't get him because then we ended up getting Chad Baker-Mazara instead.
Yeah,
and
I'm fine with it.
Yeah, we lucked out there, and we didn't show any interest in him this time around. We got Miles Kelly instead, so I think we're fine there. But yeah, Georgia, I think that I could see them, peaking out at being like an upper middle pack SEC team. Maybe finishing like 7th in the conference at best. But I think we'll see them.
Yeah.
If I had to guess, I'd say we'll probably see them in about the 10th range. It's a talented roster.
It is. They're young. They're young. I mean, They have Blue Kane, as you mentioned, Tyron Lawrence. And they have a couple of those Mount St. Mary's transfers, Deshaun Montgomery, Dakota LaFew, Silas Demery's been there a while. As you mentioned, Asa Newell, one of the best freshmen in the conference. Georgia's a really talented team. I think they're an NCAA tournament team this year. But I'm with you. I think Auburn's just, again, we're on another level. I think Georgia, in Stegeman Coliseum, could beat Auburn. I don't think it's very likely. I give it about a 5 to 10% chance.
Because that'll be 50% Auburn fans at that game.
Yeah, it'll be a neutral site.
Yeah. I see them as a bubble team. I don't see Mike White being the coach at Georgia much longer. The way these build this roster, I mean, most of these guys are not going to be on the team next year. If you're really looking at it, their star freshmen's obviously going to the NBA draft. I mean, Lawrence is out of eligibility. Blue Kane could come back, but I'm going to be surprised if he hit the portal and just took more money somewhere else.
I could see him at Auburn next year. Just straight up, I could see Blue Kane at Auburn next year. Maybe not, but I could see it.
Yeah, I mean, we need shooters. I'm not exactly sure his shooting percentages, but I believe he's a decent shooter. But
yeah, he's a good shooter. I don't know off the top of my head either, but he's a good they'll upset a few games this year, but they kind of remind me of Ole Miss last year. And Ole Miss came into the conference undefeated last year. They're not undefeated, and then I think they lost like 9 of their last 11 SEC games. I just kind of see Georgia having a similar result. Yeah,
I don't see them with the way. I mean, if you took this team to the SEC maybe 10 years ago, it'd be a top 5 SEC team. But just right now, I'm not expecting too much out of Georgia. And there's just a lot of teams in the SEC right now who look a whole lot better than UGA.
Yeah. And one prediction, right before we move on from Georgia, one prediction I had is that as confident you and I are that Auburn's going to sweep Georgia in basketball next year, we're going to be every bit as confident the next time we go and play football at Athens that we're going to win in there. Because Georgia, to me, they're kind of falling off a little in football. Auburn's taking off.
Yeah, it's very surprising. You would think Georgia would be a top in the NIL game, but it seems like they're not. They're not getting any star receivers. They don't have any star receivers. They haven't got any type of quarterback out of the portal. So I guess they're just rolling with the Gunnar Stockton guy. It's just Georgia football has kind of surprised me in this NIL era. It seems like they're falling off pretty fast, and yeah, it'd be interesting to see next year. I don't think that's the defense is talented, but that's
I don't even know if we're playing there next year. I don't think we are, but because we flip flop. I think we. Oh, do we keep Georgia on football or no?
Yeah, we're playing Georgia next year.
Okay, yeah, I'm excited.
Georgia at home.
Okay, well, yeah, I think we got a good shot. Oh, I was thinking the year. Okay, never mind. I was thinking the year beyond that. My bad. Anyway, back on topic. Back to Kentucky, or back to basketball, where Auburn plays Kentucky at Kentucky this upcoming year. Of course, they got a new coach, Mark Pope, from BYU. Under him, their tempo has been 35th in the country, 12th in offensive efficiency, 62nd in defensive efficiency. Non-conference strength of schedule is 63. Really, those numbers look pretty similar to what I'd imagine they were when Calipari was there. 10-2 record, good wins over Duke, Gonzaga, Louisville, lost at Clemson. Had another recent loss. can't remember exactly what it is. But the big difference in this Kentucky team, to me, compared to what it has been in years past, is this year they have a bunch of seniors on their team. They have a bunch of transfers from Oklahoma, San Diego State, from BYU, of course. And to me, they've been a team in years past where they just get all these one-and-done type freshmen. I think having all these seniors on their roster could benefit them, especially come towards March. What you think about the Kentucky Wildcats this year?
I think they've been pretty overrated, honestly. I don't think they're going to be a top 8 team in the SEC, really.
Wow.
You look at Kentucky's roster. All transfer portal players, pretty much, and none of them were the leading scorers on their team last year. I think they got a lot of hype after beating Duke on a neutral site. Duke obviously started a bunch of freshmen, had a new roster together. They beat Auburn at home, and Duke's, that's a great win, but I'm not trying to take that away from them. I'm not impressed with Kentucky, and I think they've looked bad in multiple games this year. I think in SEC play they'll really get exposed. I just don't. It's not a really talented roster to me, if I'm being completely honest. There's no one on that team who wows me. Who I'm like, there's not a player on that team I'm like that's going to scare me going into that game. That I'm like, he's going to be a tough guy to guard. I'll go ahead and say I think Kentucky will be right there with Georgia. I think they're going to end up being like a last 4 in type of team. I think they're going to really struggle in the SEC play.
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough. I think going on the road and beating Kentucky is going to be. If we were playing them in Auburn or keep doing it, Neville Arena, it would be tough. It would be pretty easy. Excuse me. Going into Kentucky, it's going to be a tougher one. I could certainly see us losing it. I don't think we will. Spoiler: I think we win. To me, one person that really kind of sticks out on their roster to me is Lamont Butler. Not the best offensive player in the country, even though he does average around 15 a game. Dude was on the team for San Diego State that thankfully beat the Alabama Crimson Tide on their way to the national championship. I believe they lost. But he's a very talented player, plays really good defense. At the end of the day, though, I think you're right. I think they have some solid transfers that came in. None of them just wow you, though. So I think at the end of the day, Auburn does go into Kentucky's Rupp Arena and gets the job done.
Yeah, that'll be a wild game. I'm currently planning on going to that game.
Really?
Up in Lexington. But yeah, that's obviously going to be one of our tougher games of the year with that being in Lexington. No matter how good they are, that's always going to be a tough matchup for us. But, a lot of people were really high on Kentucky. I know they were ranked 4 just like a week ago. Mm-hmm. I'm not with that. I don't agree with everyone on that. I don't think they're going to be a very good team. And let me look at who did they. I know they beat Duke. Who else did they beat?
Gonzaga would be their other really nice win.
Okay.
But then after that, it's kind of a fall. Excuse me, coughing. Louisville would probably be their third best win. Which Louisville's not great. Louisville's decent.
Yeah.
ACC school. Lost at Clemson. Clemson's a tough one. I think they lost another game.
They lost really recently to someone else.
I think it was a good team in their defense, but looking it up here. Ohio State. Oh, never mind. They lost by 20 to Ohio State. That's a bad loss.
Yeah, 20-point loss to a team Auburn just beat by 38. That I just don't see. Yeah, as I was saying, that the Kobe Bryant guy can shoot 3-pointers. It's a bunch of role players that are old, and that's the only thing they got going for them is that they're old. But Kentucky will be in the bottom half of the SEC before the end of the year. Mark my words.
Yeah. I think it could happen. You're talking me into thinking that. It's just funny how years ago everyone was trying to beat Kentucky. Now Kentucky just wants to beat Auburn, even though they're probably not going to be able to in their own arena. It's a real fall from grace from the once big team in the SEC. Got to feel bad for their fans. So moving on now to a team that I think could be the worst team in the SEC this year. They may not be, but they certainly could be. The LSU Tigers. Head coach Matt McMahon. Tempo, they're 115th in the country. Offensive efficiency, 82nd in the country. Defensive efficiency, they're 45th in the country. Non-conference strength of schedule is 294 out of 364 teams. Best wins are at Florida State, at Kansas State, UCF. So those are 3 solid wins. Losses are to Pitt and SMU. Not the best teams, but certainly respectable losses. What do you think about LSU this year?
Yeah, worst team in the SEC.
Think so?
Yeah, they'd be competing with Vanderbilt, maybe South Carolina for that position as of
Maybe
now.
Missouri? I think Missouri might be in there too. We'll see. We'll get to them. But LSU's in that conversation.
I mean, they beat Florida State, and I don't know what's happening to Florida State right now that makes their football and basketball program just absolutely terrible.
Cursed.
Kansas State looked like a good win, another one of those teams that they overpaid for Coleman Hawkins, who's just ended up being nothing. They paid like $2 million for him.
Wow.
They beat UCF, but this roster just won't be able to compete with the SEC. And the McMahon guy, I believe he was the coach when John Morant was at Murray State. I'm not too sure that he's a great coach. He's not recruiting very well, and it seems like he was just at Murray State, had a more talented roster than most of the teams he played at Murray State, which is why he won so many games over there. I'll go ahead and say it. Mac McMahon will be fired after this year. He's coach number 1. I'll keep a tally of this, but yeah, he's a coach. He's gone after this year. He's a goner.
Yeah, I'm with you there 100%. But I will say this in his defense. You and I have certainly watched every single of all the 16 teams in the SEC. We've seen all of them play. We've watched every team on TV play at home. You know, you watch Texas, you watch Oklahoma, any of the new teams. You name the team, Ole Miss, Alabama, Auburn, Kentucky. If you watch their home games, you can see a student section. When you look at LSU, watch them play at home, their student section has to be the worst in the SEC. I mean, their student section sucks for basketball, which is funny because in football, it's one of the best, if not the best. It probably is the best.
And we've been going to Auburn games for so long that we know how bad the student section was until Bruce Pearl got there.
Yeah, awful.
I remember, when I was at school at Auburn, Bruce Pearl was out handing donuts out in the library at midnight. I mean, he was doing anything and everything he can to start getting students to come to the games, and he got involved and got out in the crowd. And obviously, once you start winning games, I remember that first game Auburn played with a ranking beside them. We ranked like 23, and it was SEC play. Yeah, it was SEC play, and
they were ranked. I think they were number 21.
Yeah, we had watched Auburn basketball our whole life and never once. I mean, I was born in 1998, so I know we were ranked in 1999 or whatever.
In 03. We weren't ranked, but we made the Elite Eight.
Yeah, but I couldn't remember. I mean, I can remember going to games since like 2008, and I couldn't once remember us being ranked, and it was just a wild thing. And now it's just the expectation, which has changed at Auburn. Which I know we've already talked about Auburn, but as we're doing this, I'm coming up with
No, but it makes you think that LSU might need a taste of that, because I could just be way off base here. I know, like if you're watching LSU on TV, the left side of the court behind the basket, that's where they put the student section. But whenever I've seen the camera pan over there, it's there, but it's not big at all. Like it is, and it's not impacting the game. I think they need something like a Bruce Pearl, someone who's going to come and inject a bunch of energy into that program, and Matt McMahon is clearly not that guy.
Yeah. Hey, we have a couple of good coaches in Alabama they could look at after this year. I think Bucky McMillan at Sanford is going to end up being a SEC coach or a top. He's going to end up coaching at a Power 5, Power 4 school, whatever you want to call it, in basketball. He's got to watch out for. Also, I like Adam Kennedy over at UAB. I know they're not too great, but
Andy
Kennedy. You're right.
Yeah.
He was successful at SEC before. I think I forget why he got fired. It wasn't because he wasn't.
He fell off a little bit at Ole Miss.
Yeah, I don't think it was because he wasn't a great coach. I think something happened. I could be wrong.
Gotcha.
But yeah, he's been pretty good at UAB. Had them in the playoffs. But yeah, I think they should move on unless he has just an absolutely fluke season, kind of like the South Carolina team did last year. But
yeah, but we're in agreement. Matt McMahon, you're fired.
Mm-hmm.
All right, now moving on to the team we were just talking about, Ole Miss, the former College of Andy Kennedy. Their head coach now is Chris Beard. Adjusted tempo is 170th in the country, so right there in the middle. Offensive efficiency is 34th. Defensive efficiency's 51st. Non-conference strength of schedule 278. Talking about teams who we thought might be the worst in the SEC, I don't think Ole Miss is it, but I think Ole Miss might be in that conversation. I don't think they're in the top 10 of the SEC. Their best wins are going to be over BYU and Louisville, lost to Memphis and Purdue. Again, whenever this team they've beaten the teams they were supposed to beat, but whenever they've stepped up in competition, they've lost. Purdue and Memphis. What are your thoughts on Ole Miss this year?
Well, for starters, I think Chris Beard is one of the best coaches in the SEC. I think the problem is, I think Ole Miss is a very hard place to have a successful basketball program. I think he's he's on year 2, and I think he's doing a great job of putting together a roster pretty fast. I'm making a list as we go of how I'm ranking these SEC teams. I currently put them between Kentucky. I put them between Kentucky and Georgia. I don't see Ole Miss having too much. They're probably a middle of the pack, slightly lower than middle of the pack SEC team this year. They looked pretty bad yesterday in their game at Memphis, but again, it's hard to win on the road. I remember that Sean Padula guard coming into Auburn last year when we played Virginia Tech, and
yeah, he can shoot. He didn't play too well against us, but he can shoot. Yeah,
exactly. And I remember seeing that they got him, and I was like, he might struggle in the SEC. Matthew Morrell, he was preseason All SEC. He's not been as good as he's been in the past couple of years. Not to say he couldn't get that going. I like that Dre Davis guy they have on their team who transferred from Seton Hall. He's decent. Brakefield transferred over from Duke after his freshman year. Was a disappointment over there. But honestly, they could use him now. They don't have too much depth at Duke. They have a good team, don't get me wrong. It's just they could probably use them. Ole Miss, last year, as I said earlier in this podcast, that they were 13-0 in non-conference play and ended up losing 9 of their last 11 games. I don't think they've improved too much from last year, to be honest, but I am a fan of their coach, and I think they have a chance in the coming years if they can keep Chris Beard. But yeah, Ole Miss, another borderline NCAA tournament team for me.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel. Auburn gets them home and away. I think we'll put them away easily at home. Away can be tough. Ole Miss, one of those teams that has a newer arena where the students are on the court. So if they're doing pretty well, and especially with Auburn doing well, their students are going to show up for that one. And it's going to be a tough environment to play in. So I think the environment alone is going to make it tough. And they also have some veteran guys, as you mentioned, Padula, Jalen Murray was on that St. Peter's Elite 8 team, Matthew Murrell, who's been there a while, Dre Davis, who's played college basketball a while, and Brakefield, who seems like he's been at Ole Miss for 10 years. They're going to be a team that at home, that's going to be tough. That's one of those, I could see Auburn losing it. I think ultimately will prevail and win just because we're that much better than them. And a lot of those players I mentioned are guards. I don't know if they have as many big men who can handle Broom. So yeah, that's it on Ole Miss. So with that said, we'll move to their cross-state rival, Mississippi State. Their head coach is Chris Jans, came over from New Mexico State. Their adjusted tempo, 173rd in the country, so right in the middle of the pack. What shot me with them is their offensive efficiency is 17th in the country, so really high on the offensive end. And then defensive efficiency is the 33rd in the country. Non-conference schedule is 90th, but I want to go back to that. Whenever I think of Mississippi State and Chris Jans, I think defense. And their defense is solid at 33rd in the country. But offense, I did not expect that with this Mississippi State team. It's 17th in the country. They're 11-1, only losses to Pitt, not a great loss, but they won at Memphis, which is something Ole Miss can't say. Beat Pitt, won at a tough SMU team. Again, I know Josh Hubbard is phenomenal on offense, but I didn't expect that overall offensive strength there for Mississippi State. What do you think about them this year, Michael? I have my thoughts.
I've got Mississippi State. We've agreed on most of these, and we might agree here again. I think Mississippi State's going to end up being a top 5 SEC team.
I think they're a top 4 SEC team. I
was going to maybe take it that far too.
Yeah.
I don't know where I'm going to put him at this list. I think Josh Hubbard is one of the best players in the SEC. I think he is the best point guard in the SEC going right now. He's an undersized guy, or else he'd already be in the NBA. Chris Jans when Mississippi State hired him, I didn't think too much of him, but he's actually ended up being a very good coach for them. Riley Kugel was supposed to be a very good player at Florida. I mean, he's doing all right this year. They had that Boston College transfer. He's been pretty good. They had Melendez from Georgia. And then Cameron Matthews. He's just one of the best wing defenders in the SEC. He finished top 5 in the SEC Defensive Player of the Year vote last year. I remember. Just a very solid team, led by Josh Hubbard. As long as he stays healthy, I see them winning a lot of SEC games. That's another place that's not easy to just go win at as well.
No.
And Mississippi State, with them not having football, we know how it goes. When your football team ends up being absolutely terrible, you're just looking for something to grasp for. And those Mississippi State fans are looking at basketball right now, and they got a lot to be excited about.
Very physical team. They always do with Chris Jans. And something you mentioned as well is they've always had, good fans there at Mississippi State, but then now that the last 2 or 3 years, might have even been more than that at this point, but a few years ago they redid their student section to where some of them kind of get to be right there on the court. That's made it tougher to play there, and it's been exciting for their college students.
And who did they lose to?
They lost to Pitt, which again, not a great win, and that's kind of how Mississippi State is. Like, or at least in my head, I'm like, okay, this is a team that's traditionally really good on defense. They don't play an incredibly fast pace, but sometimes the offense isn't there. And the offense is 17th in the country, but I feel like this is one of those offenses. If Josh Hubbard goes cold, which doesn't happen often, then you could really be. It could be really a lot easier to shut them down. But again, they do have other scorers on their team now with R.J. Melendez, Georgia transfer, used to be at Illinois. Claudel Harris, Boston College transfer, used to be at Charleston Southern. Keyshawn Murphy. They have guys who can score. Kugel, as you mentioned. Cameron Matthews. They have guys who can score. This is one of those teams.
I wasn't trying to fact check you, but I just
fact check me.
I'll fact check you. They beat Pitt 90-57, and Pitt was actually ranked at the time. They lost to Butler.
Oh. Wow. Wow. Yeah, you're right. I did. I messed that up. So, yeah, I misread that. That's my bad. So, yeah, thanks for doing that. But Butler, to me, not a great – was it at Butler?
I believe neutral site.
Okay. To me, that's still not a – that's a loss they shouldn't have taken. But regardless, still a good team. One bad game isn't going to define you. They're a really good team. I think, for me, my top 4, while we're mentioning it, you might agree with me to a T. I have number 1, Auburn. Number 2, I have Florida. Number 3, I have Tennessee. Number 4, I have Mississippi State. Probably number 5, I have Alabama. A few other teams up there, but that's where I have Mississippi State right now. Anything else before we move on?
Yeah, I'm just making this list as I go because I honestly haven't made a list here, but I'm putting Mississippi State in between. I think they'll finish above Alabama but below Florida.
Okay. Fair enough. So next up we have the Missouri Tigers, a team I'm going to put in that category with LSU. I'm going to put them in the potentially worst team in the SEC category. Head coach is Dennis Gates. I don't think they won an SEC game last year. They were winless. They're 153rd in the conference in 153rd in the country in adjusted tempo, 30th in offensive efficiency, 100th in defensive efficiency. The big thing for them, I see that's big red flag. Looking at their non-conference strength of schedule, out of 364 teams, the Missouri Tigers are 359th. That is not good. Looking at wins they've got this season, really the only one that's good, and it's a really good win, is Kansas at home, which Kansas isn't as good as we all thought they were going to be. The next best one they have is Cal, which Cal is not that good. Looking at losses, they lost to Illinois. They lost at Memphis. I don't think there's a whole lot to love here. Do you feel differently with Missouri?
Yeah. No, Missouri's terrible.
Yeah.
You look at them last year. I don't even think they won an SEC game last year.
No, I don't think they did.
And so what do they do this offseason? They bring in Mark Mitchell from Duke, who wasn't very good at Duke. They bring in... Was Caleb Grill on their team last year?
He was. I forget if it was an injury or what his deal was. He's out now with a neck injury. I'm not sure when or if he'll be back this year. But he was on their roster last year. I don't know what the deal was, but he didn't play very much, if any.
They brought the center from South Carolina, who wasn't very good, Gray. I don't believe South Carolina wanted to keep him, but Yeah, I think Missouri can go ahead and lock their spot in as a bottom 4 SEC team.
Yeah.
And I think as well, you can go ahead and put Dennis Gates in the "you're fired" category.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think just because we did it for Matt McMahon, we'll do it for Dennis Gates. Dennis Gates, you're fired. Yeah, you're not a very look. You might be a good coach. I don't know, but you haven't done very good at Missouri, and
No.
you beat Kansas. That was a good win. We'll give you that. Thanks for doing that for the conference. You made us look good. But
Yeah, I'm sure
you're
a
a
good
bottom
coach.
four.
Yeah, I'm sure he's a good guy, but he's a terrible coach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Compared to other SEC coaches, he's pretty terrible.
Hey, but if he wants to come to the Bruce Pearl School of Coaching, we'll take him as an assistant.
Yeah, as an analyst.
Yeah.
So moving on to another team in the SEC who I don't think is super great, but I feel very differently about their coach. The Oklahoma Sooners. Porter Moser is their head coach. Adjusted tempo 181, so right in the middle. Offensive efficiency of 27th. Defensive efficiency of 63rd in the country. Non-conference strength of schedule pretty weak at 305, but they're undefeated. They've beaten all the teams they were supposed to, and then some. They beat Michigan, they beat Arizona, they beat Oklahoma State. No losses on the season. But one thing I do want to, before I kick it over to you, Michael, Porter Moser. I mean, I don't think Oklahoma's one of the better teams in the SEC. I think they're middle of the pack. Maybe they might be around 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th in that range. But I think he's one of the best coaches in basketball. I mean, for him to take. He was the head coach at Loyola Chicago. Took that team to the Final Four. Then he took that same group a couple years later to the Elite Eight, I believe. So, I mean, I don't know if there's another coach in the country who's capable of doing more with less talent. I mean, he is a phenomenal coach, in my opinion. And if he could start recruiting up there with the likes of Nate Oates, Bruce Pearl, and John Calipari, Oklahoma's scary. You might feel differently. I'm going to dish it over to you. What you think?
Yeah, for me, Oklahoma is one of the hardest teams to judge when I'm doing these SEC rankings as we go. Because, one, they weren't in the SEC last year. And, two, they lost almost all of their production from last year's team. And so I think going into the year, a lot of people didn't think they were going to be very good. I know they brought in Duke Miles, who was a guy Auburn pretty much said, hey, you can come here and compete for a backup point guard spot. Which, looking back on it, we would have much rather had him over J.P. Pegues. But, yeah, they're a hard team to judge. They've beaten Michigan, Arizona, and I think they beat Oklahoma State as well. Yeah, they've already played. They beat Oklahoma State. And so, they're a hard team. It's easy to say they're just going to be a middle-of-the-pack SEC team. I'll have them finishing. Of the people we've done so far, I'll put Oklahoma between Ole Miss and UGA. I think they'll struggle when it comes to SEC time. None of those wins really impressed me. Michigan.
Yeah. It seems like a fair spot to put them. Fair spot to put them right in the middle.
Yeah, it's hard to say because they've beaten all the teams that they were supposed to beat. They got super lucky to beat Michigan. They hit a and 1-3 to win the game.
That was wild.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they're about Ole Miss caliber. From what I've seen, definitely not a team that I expect to have any shot at winning the NCAA tournament. But again, Oklahoma, just like Mississippi State, poor football season for their standards. They got something to be excited about. Their basketball team's undefeated right now, so it's hard to really critique them. But yeah, I don't think they're going to do very well in the SEC personally.
Yeah, I tend to be on your side. I think they are just above those top 4 teams in the SEC. But again, I love their coach. They've overperformed so far this year, granted against a weak schedule, so credit where credit is due. Now moving on, South Carolina. Oh, and also with Oklahoma, we play them at home. We're not going to lose to them. Let's just be serious. Same with Missouri, but I don't think I'd address it against Missouri. We're not going to lose either of those teams. Next up on the list, South Carolina. Head coach Lamont Paris. 250th in the country in adjusted tempo, so they like to go slower. Offensive efficiency, they're 79th in the country. Defensive efficiency, kind of their bread and butter, 56th in the country. They're kind of always been the strength of South Carolina, seemingly. Strength of schedule in the non-conference, 249th, so nothing too crazy there. Best wins are going to be Clemson at home, at Boston College. Not a great team, but going on the road, winning in Boston, pretty good. Virginia Tech at home, not a great win, but, still an ACC school. Losses, Xavier at Indiana, and then North Florida. So that's a pretty bad loss there. But North Florida's kind of a team that plays a very gimmicky style, takes a lot of threes, so they can be tricky. I believe you mentioned they beat Georgia Tech this year too, so maybe they're just a tricky team. What are your thoughts on South Carolina this year, Michael? Do you think they're bottom 4, or do you think they're above that?
Well, if you look at last year, South Carolina was projected bottom of the SEC, and then ended up being, I believe, a top 5 team, at least a top 6 team. I believe top 5 finished last year.
They're number 5.
Yeah, and I think this year they're kind of setting back into reality. Colin Murray-Boyles is probably one of the better players in the SEC, but outside of him, I'm not too sure last year, Michi Johnson, you look at a guy like him, he was one of the better players on South Carolina last year. He's gone over to Ohio State, and he hasn't been very good. It's just they have Nick Pringle from Alabama, which, I bet them Alabama fans wish they kept Nick Pringle now instead of Cliff Amore. Seemed like he did a better job for Alabama last year, for being honest, which I never would have guessed that going into the year. But, they beat Clemson, barely beat Clemson at home. They beat Boston College, Virginia Tech. Those are decent wins, but I can't forget that North Florida loss. Indiana and Xavier also. I'm going to have to say they're going to, unfortunately, I think they're going to be a bottom 4 SEC team. Right now, my bottom 4 SEC teams are Missouri, LSU, South Carolina, and Vanderbilt. Lamont Butler, I believe is that their coach's name, or I butchered that? Lamont Paris, that's what
Lamont
it is.
Paris. You're thinking of the guard, I believe, for
Kentucky.
Kentucky, yeah.
Yeah. Paris, I'm pretty sure he may have even won SEC Coach of the Year last year, which was well deserved. He might want to get out of South Carolina. He's definitely not the year fired category, anywhere close to that. But
after last year, he's bought himself at least a year.
Yeah, but I don't think South Carolina is going to be too great this year. Just don't have the roster, but I would love to see Colin Murray-Boyles in an Auburn uniform next year.
So, one thing I will say, you said they're a bottom 4 team for you. They're not a bottom 4 team for me in the SEC. 2 of the teams we've mentioned already are bottom 4, LSU and Missouri. I'm not going to mention the other 2. Other 2 we haven't spoken about yet, but I will get to them. I think South Carolina might be bottom 5, might be bottom 6. I don't think they're very good, but I'm going to go ahead and say this. I think they're going to be a tougher matchup for Auburn this year. Auburn plays them in South Carolina, and South Carolina plays one of the slower paces in the SEC of other teams. I think there's only one team that plays slower, so that means less possessions for Auburn, less chances for us to really distance ourselves. They play pretty solid defense, and their best player is a big man who did pretty well against us last year. So, I think they match up with us pretty well until we play them in South Carolina. I think we'll win, but I think it'll be a close game. Do you feel differently? You think we'll blow them out?
You said the game's at South Carolina?
It's at South Carolina.
And this kind of brings me back to 2 years ago, which I know is completely unrelated for South Carolina's roster, but you look at 2 years ago, Auburn had Janai Broome, and I just remember, it was such a worse team. It was Wendell Green and all those guys. And they just went into South Carolina and absolutely blew them out.
Yeah.
South Carolina's been pretty bad. They were good last year, but the years before, they were the worst team in the SEC.
And we blew them out twice last year.
Yeah, I think Auburn goes in there and blows them out.
And I think that does happen, but I just see a world where they keep it close because they play slower pace. They play a slower pace and they play pretty solid D. So
yeah, at the end of the day, it's hard to forget how good Auburn is. They beat Ohio State by 38, who just beat Kentucky the next week by 20. They just beat Purdue, who's going to be a top 6 seed, by 30 this past week. I just don't see a scenario where South Carolina plays a close game, but again, you never know with SEC home refereeing.
Yep. So moving on next to one of the better teams in the SEC, the currently number 1 ranked Tennessee Volunteers. Head coach is Rick Barnes. One thing we know about Tennessee under Rick Barnes is defense. They play a little slower. I think they're the slowest paced team in the SEC. They're 257th in the country in adjusted tempo. Offensive efficiency is 14th in the country. Defensive efficiency, I checked it a week ago, it was number 1. Now they've dropped all the way to number 2 in the country in defense. So as we all know, Tennessee plays their defense. Non-conference strength of schedule isn't anything too crazy, 155. But they've won all their games, and they've won the games they're supposed to. They won at Louisville, which is tough. They beat Baylor. Won at Illinois. Might be their best win. So, again, no crazy wins, but pretty solid wins right there. What do you think about Tennessee this year, Michael? We've already discussed I have them third in the country, or third in the SEC.
Yeah, it's hard to pick between them and Florida right now. I'm right there with you for the second or third best team in the SEC. But, yeah, I think I'll put Tennessee at the number 2 team in the SEC after looking at everything. Obviously, they lost the best player in the SEC, Dalton Connect. So going into this offseason, everyone had Tennessee as a very good team. And I was kind of shocked because I knew Zakai Ziegler came back, and he's obviously one of the best point guards in the country. But I was like, do they really think they're going to get lucky again in the transfer portal and find themselves another Dalton Connect? And they haven't, but they did a great job with the guys they did bring in. Chaz Lanier has been super impressive. He came in from USC Upstate, I believe. I know they have that big man they brought in from Charlotte. I remember watching him versus FAU last year.
I think you got to mix up. And I'm sorry to fact check you. I'm gonna give that to you this time. Chaz Lanier, I believe, came from North Florida, and what you're thinking of Upstate was
Gainey. Gainey. I meant
also a really good player though who can score.
Yeah. Well, that's crazy. Chaz Lanier, that South Carolina lost to them without him. But anyway, Gainey's been great too. And then I remember watching that big man Igor. I randomly watched the Charlotte versus FAU game that came up on my ESPN last year when I was sitting at home, and I watched it, and he was very impressive. So, yeah, Tennessee's done a great job with the guys they've brought in. And
of course, they have Zakai Ziegler. That guy's been there for forever. I mean, he's not scoring at the same clip, but we know he can dish it out, assist. He's a very talented point guard.
Yeah, I believe he was Defensive Player of the Year in the SEC last year, which I thought Broome got absolutely robbed, but that's all right. I think them and Florida are going to be battling it out for second. It wouldn't be surprising me if some other teams are up there with them, but I mean, what they've done with the teams they put in front of them, they've won every game. That Illinois win on the road, I know some Auburn fans, just because they won us number 1 in the AP poll, try to downplay that, but that was a really good win. Going into Illinois and winning a basketball game is not easy, especially with the team they have this year. And Zakai Ziegler had like 4 fouls with like 16 minutes left in that half, and they had to play with him in foul trouble. It kind of looked like that Auburn Duke game out there, the way the referees were calling that game too. It seemed like they were out to get to Tennessee from the beginning. So yeah, from what I've seen so far, I'll have to put Tennessee at second, but they're right there with Florida. I mean, they outside of Illinois, let's see, who have they beaten? They beat Baylor as well, and that I remember watching that Louisville game too. I mean, Louisville's Louisville; they're like 8-5 or something like that. But going into Louisville and winning the way they did was
a good win.
It's domination. Impressive. So yeah, I'll put Tennessee at 2.
Okay, so you have it a little different than me.
No.
All right, so we'll move on to the next team, and I'm going to say spoiler alert, Michael. This is a team that I have bottom 4 in the SEC this year, and that is the Texas Longhorns. I think that they're a long way than what they used to be under Chris Beard. Their head coach is Rodney Terry. I believe he took over there as soon as that scandal went on with Chris Beard, with I believe hitting his wife, allegedly. Adjusted tempo, a little on the slower side, but kind of in the middle at 209th in the country. Offensive efficiency 43rd, defensive efficiency 30. Both pretty solid numbers, but when you look at their non-conference strength of schedule at 356, makes it a little less impressive. They have wins over Syracuse, who I don't think is very good. St. Joseph's, who I think's average. They've lost to Ohio State, lost to UConn, and they just got demolished by UConn at home. Looking at their roster, they have some nice pieces there. Jordan Pope, Trey Johnson, a very talented freshman, Arthur Kaluma. But I just don't see it with this team. I mean, they haven't played anyone whenever they've stepped up in competition. They've gotten beaten. I don't think there's a lot to love here. I think that Rodney Terry might need to be added to the year fired list. But before I add him to that list, I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, Texas has a lot of money, and I think he might be on the year fired list by the end of the year as well. You look at it, they have Trey Johnson, who really came out of nowhere. He's a freshman, averaging, he might be leading all freshmen in scoring this year. I'm not sure. Shoots like 43% from three-pointer. He kind of came out of nowhere. He's looking like he's going to be a first-round pick. And then they have a couple of guys that I believe they overpaid for in the transfer portal. Arthur Kamula, who started at Creighton, transferred to Kansas State. He's another guy who feels like he's been in college basketball forever now. Just hasn't improved too much since he started college basketball or over the past few years, really. I mean, he's a decent player, but not a guy who I just see being an absolute star in the SEC. Mark, I kind of liked him in Arkansas last year at times. Was even better at Houston, but at the end of the day, I think this is another really hard team to judge just because it's a whole roster of guys just brought in this year, and they haven't played a whole lot of tough competition. And after me and you watched Auburn destroy Ohio State, it's hard to really any team that loses to Ohio State, it's hard to really respect them after that, unless they lost at Ohio State, which they didn't. Yeah.
I watched him play. I watched part of their UConn game, and just the way UConn demolished them. Like, I get UConn's a solid team, but the way they came into Texas and just demolished them. I mean, it wasn't close.
Yeah, I don't have them as a bottom 4 SEC team, but I'll have them in the next core guys, which would be like Kentucky, Ole Miss, and UGA for me. Yeah, so I'll have them finishing in the bottom half of the SEC, but I can see them being in the middle. I think they'll make the tournament.
Okay. And they could. They're kind of my edgy pick for bottom 4. I think they certainly have a higher ceiling, but I'm not a huge believer. Next up on the list, we're going to stay within the state, but I think I'm going to be way more positive with this team. We have the Texas A&M Fighting Aggies, coached by Buzz Williams. Kind of like Tennessee, what do you know they're going to do? They're going to play defense very well. Offense can be hit-miss, but defense is going to be played. Adjusted tempo is 226 in the country, so they play a little bit on the slower side. Defensive efficiency, they're 6th in the country. Offensive efficiency, 41st. Non-conference strength of schedule, 52nd. They're a team I feel really good about. I mean, they have wins over Purdue, Creighton, Ohio State. Lost at UCF, which that's probably a better loss than you'd think. They lost to Oregon. I mean, I could criticize them for that, but Alabama also lost to them. And I think, for me, in my mind, A&M and Alabama are kind of battling for 5th and 6th best team in the SEC. But you just look at what A&M has. Wade Taylor, Zurich Phillips, Henry Coleman. And then they just returned so many players who played there in the past. Hayden Hefner, Anderson Garcia, Solomon Washington, Jace Carter. I really like this A&M team this year. What do you think?
Yeah. I hadn't put a list together until we talked about it now. And so I'm going to have to drop Mississippi State out of the top 4 of the SEC because I think I figured Texas. I knew I had Texas A&M high. I think they'll be right there with Tennessee and Florida in the SEC. I'll put them at 4 right now, finish in the SEC. I think, as you said, it's hard to find this day in college basketball and a roster of college basketball players who have played together before. These guys have won before as well. They were better 2 years ago than they were this past year. Obviously, who's that big man? He transferred from Michigan State. He's playing. His name is Henry Coleman.
Yeah,
Henry Coleman. I believe he was out last year. I could be wrong.
I don't know. I think he played some late. I don't know. I could be wrong.
No, he went to Duke. That's where it was. I can't remember, but I really like Texas A&M. They brought in the SMU transfer, returned all the guys they had. Solomon Washington's a great defender. Hefner's a great shooter. Wade Taylor he hasn't.
They all play defense.
Yeah,
they all
exactly.
Play defense.
Yeah, I could see them even finishing second in the SEC, but I'll have them at 4. They've played a pretty tough. I don't know if you said it, but I'm pretty sure they've played a pretty tough non-conference schedule.
52nd in the country, on the tougher side.
Yeah,
I may not have mentioned that.
I watched them beat Purdue, and that was pretty impressive. And hey, the way some of these teams are losing to Ohio State, I guess you can call that an impressive win.
Yeah, I guess you can. And
yeah.
I'm gonna go and give you this prediction here, because when I look at the SEC, I think Auburn's way better than every single team out there, and quite frankly, I think Auburn should win every single game in the SEC. But this is going to be, Auburn's not perfect, they're going to have games where they come out and not play as well. I think Auburn's only loss in the SEC is at Texas A&M. And the reason being is that they, again, as mentioned, they've had guys, they have a core group that's just been there for forever. They play defense. And then it feels like Buzz Williams has always given Auburn trouble. I can remember once he brought a 500 team into Neville Arena and beat Auburn when we were one of the best teams in the SEC. He's just always been a coach that's been able to give us fits. They play really good D. I think Auburn is going to win all their games in the SEC this year, but I think their one loss is going to be at Texas A&M. Do you think we're able to escape that game with a victory?
Yeah, I think, as I've said, I mean, if you come up to me, I'm going to predict Auburn to win every single game in the conference schedule. I think we should be the favorite in every single game we play.
Yeah.
But realistically, I just think we're going to slip up a couple times just because you rarely see a team go undefeated in the SEC, especially with how good it is this year. But yeah, if I was to pick a couple of games we might lose, A&M would definitely be on. A&M and Alabama are probably at the top two of my list right now. We don't play at Tennessee. We don't play at Florida. Do we play at
Mississippi State? It sets up well for us.
Yeah, it does.
I think Mississippi State, let me check on that. I think we would get Mississippi State at home. Yeah, we just get Mississippi State at home.
Yeah, we get Arkansas at home. Very favorable.
At
SEC
South
schedule.
Carolina, we're at Texas. I didn't mention that one, but I think we'll cruise in that one.
Yeah, that's gonna be a tough one though. I think at Texas, the second game of the SEC I think it could be a slip up, but
and earlier, I don't think they're very good, but earlier in the conference play, their students might have more belief because their record's good right now. I don't care. I think we'll cakewalk them. I'm not.
So
you
think only one team's going to storm the court this year when they play us?
Yeah, and that's a great, excellent point. Any team that beats Auburn this year storming the court, and I think congratulations Texas A&M. You have the best shot at beating Auburn. I think y'all will beat Auburn, even though again we're a significantly better team, and y'all know that. But congratulations, I think you'll win. I think y'all have a really good team, especially.
Yeah, I mean at the end of the day, we're going to be most teams. Auburn's going to be the Super Bowl for almost every single SEC team they play.
Yeah. There's no doubt about it. And with that being said, Michael, by far our longest podcast episode ever, we're getting to our last team, the Vanderbilt Commodores. Head coach Mark Byington came over from James Madison. Didn't know a whole lot about him until I did the research. Plays a faster pace, so 37th in the country in adjusted tempo, 33rd in offensive efficiency, 97th in defensive efficiency. Strength of schedule, though, 332nd, so haven't played a whole lot of teams. Their record's 11-1. One at Virginia Tech, solid win. Beat TCU, Seton Hall, Nevada. No great teams there, but respectable teams. Their one loss is to Drake, who I think is a really outstanding Atlantic 10 team, or they're Missouri Valley. They're Missouri Valley, I think, but a really good team regardless. Again, as mentioned, I think even the worst teams in the SEC are pretty solid, and I think Vanderbilt falls in that category. They're a bottom 4 SEC team, but they got some solid pieces. What do you see about this Vanderbilt team?
Yeah, there's not much to talk about here. Vanderbilt's terrible. Let's just be honest. They're not going to have a chance in the SEC. They're going to be a bottom 4 team. The roster just isn't there. The coaching isn't there. Vanderbilt just isn't what it used to be. I know for me and you growing up, going to playing at Vanderbilt was always considered one of Auburn's toughest games, but I don't know if it's the NIL era and the transfer portal era that is making Vanderbilt slip up. They're just not the basketball program they used to be, and they're just not the spot where top high school and top transfer recruits want to go anymore.
Yeah,
and so
and Kevin Stallings, and that was the coach when we were younger. He was a really good coach there. Had John Jenkins, I believe was his name, who went on to play for the Atlanta Hawks, and then Jeff Taylor. That was a really good duo. And they were one of the top teams in the SEC. I think they have some nice pieces. James Edwards, averaging 19 points a game. A.J. Hogard was a really good player at Michigan State. M.J. Collins and Tyler Nickel, Virginia Tech transfers. I think they're solid, but nothing outstanding.
Yeah, I really like the Hogard guy, but I just don't see him being enough to win you a bunch of SEC games. But I think they made the first correct step Vanderbilt made was to fire Jerry Stackhouse. I didn't think he was a very great coach. Seemed like he was just always angry. I never understood why that he was hired to begin with. Really, he didn't have really any coaching experience at all before he got there. But who's this guy they hired? Where'd they get him from?
Mark Byington from James Madison. I don't know a whole lot about the guy. He plays a faster pace. He was very successful at James Madison. We'll see. We'll see what he can do. I didn't think Nate Oates would be a great hire. He didn't have any really big-time experience, but he came over from Buffalo, and he did great. Or he's done great so far at Alabama. So maybe Byington will be in that same category. I'll kind of hold off. He's definitely not in the year fired category. It's his first year. So we'll see. But again, I'm kind of with you. I think they're a bottom 4 team. So To close the podcast, Michael, we're going to do 3 things, okay? I want to get your top 5. I want your top 5 SEC teams in order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The next, I want to hear your bottom 4 SEC teams. Who are the 4 teams, if the SEC tournament format's the same way, who are the 4 teams who are going to be playing on Wednesday? And last but not least, I'll go over your fired list and make sure we have it in the same category. So who's your top 5?
Okay, so I've said some things throughout this podcast that I ended up not really meaning, because now that we've went through every team, I was able to put a list together. So here's my top 5. Number 1, obviously Auburn. Number 2, Tennessee. Number 3, the Florida Gators. Number 4, the Texas A&M Aggies. And number 5, Alabama.
Okay. So I'll go through mine's similar, a little different. So number 1, I have Auburn, of course. I mean, it's not even close. Number 2, I'm going to differ. I'm going to flip-flop 2 and 3. Number 2, I think Florida is the second best team. Number 3, Tennessee. Number 4, here's where it gets tricky. I like Mississippi State at number 4, and I think it's tough. But for number 5, I have to go Texas A&M. I mean, they've just looked better to me than Alabama. Alabama's a close 6. No disrespect to them. They could certainly crack the top 5 before the season ends, but they're not there for me right now. So who's your bottom 4 teams?
To me, it's a clear bottom 4. I know you disagree, but I think it's clearly South Carolina, Missouri, Vanderbilt, and LSU. And I think Oklahoma could end up in that group right there with them. But they've played. Before the year, I would have had Oklahoma in the bottom 4. But the way they've played this year, I can't put them in that group. So yeah, I just those bottom 4 teams. If any of them, if I'm going to be wrong about any of them, I'll say it's going to be South Carolina, just because I could see them improving. I think they have some talented players on the roster, but I just don't see any of those 4 teams making the tournament this year, unfortunately.
Yeah, and as we've discussed, my 4 is very similar. I think that you're going to have LSU and Missouri battling it out for worst team in the SEC this year. I think they're going to be battling it out. It's going to be those 2. And then I think just a notch above them is Vanderbilt. Not much better, but I think they're a little better. Then last, I have Texas. I think there's other teams. You could argue Georgia. You could argue South Carolina, certainly. But I'm going with Texas. I'm going with my gut. I think they're in that category as well. And last but not least, the You're Fired category. We have Texas head coach Rodney Terry. We have Missouri head coach Dennis Gates. And we have LSU head coach Matt McMahon. Sorry, fellas, but you're fired. Michael, is there anything else before we wrap up this podcast? Are you ready to roll?
No, I think that's good.
Okay, well, we hope you all enjoyed our SEC basketball preview. Hope you have a phenomenal rest of your day, and War Eagle.
Yeah, follow me at AA. It's Jackson Arnold AA, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, hey, you should know your Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I just changed it recently. I was making sure I didn't make it AA Jackson Arnold. I'm about to post these rankings on here, so y'all check the comments. I'm sure there'll be some angry fans in there who disagree with me, but yeah, we'll see who's right. We've seen this movie play out before. We know how it usually goes.
Is AA Peyton Thorne or AA Jackson Arnold right or wrong? The answer is usually he's right. And follow me at Ashton Daniels AA.
Yeah. They say
Auburn Anonymous Army.
Yeah, and use the hashtag AA knows on X.
Yeah, hashtag AA knows. We appreciate all our loyal listeners listening. Hope you all have a great rest of y'all's day. Bye-bye.